Hi, everyone. Um, me and Jay are recording a podcast. We've both had a kind of just interesting ride through uh, life the last few years, not just Corona, but kind of before that, a lot of a ride through the worlds of like science, um, engineering, and also through internal experiences, learning to kind of navigate our own nature, spirituality, things like that. And we thought it would be interesting to and fun to just kind of have one of our conversations in out in the open. We put it together a little topic uh, request form. Some of the questions that we got back were great. Some of them were profoundly stupid. We'll try to touch on all of them, or on some from each category. Where our ethos is more that we're gonna pick what's interesting to talk about. We'll kind of hang out there, and then whenever we feel another, topic shift coming, we'll just go there. But we're not going to like try to get through every single topic. We'll hit as many as we can. Um, all right, so let's see. Well, so we were just talking. We were talking a little bit before recording. We were talking about there was one topic that came up that was psychological literacy, and there was also a couple of questions on non-entheogenic mind-altering experiences, and a couple of questions adjacent to that. And I think that we'll probably end up veering in that direction. But I think let's start at the topic of psychological literacy. There was climate resilience and psychological literacy. I don't think either of us feels particularly uh, expert on climate resilience, so we're just going to go into psychological literacy. Um, you want to drop some thoughts?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jay, by the way. And the person who spoke and did not introduce himself was Maki or Alex.
Yes, hi, I'm Maki. Sorry about that.
Um, Psychological literacy. Um, so what is there to know about psychology or about one's own psychology? And I think answering or addressing this topic requires like a whole realm of prefaces and disclaimers and warnings.
Which I think
Um,
we should totally ignore.
well, um, I think there's a in error in claiming expertise here on anyone's part. That's
Yeah.
that's the short version. Is that the brain is the most complicated thing we know to exist in the universe, and each of us has one strapped to us. And so the good news is that you have one, and it is yours to experiment with. It is your laboratory. So I think so much of one's understanding of psychology comes from um, understanding things through their own experience. And so, before saying anything more specific, I think there's just a general principle of being open to your own, uh, the breadth of your possible experiences, and open to having those experiences personally, observing them clearly, and learning from them.
Hmm. And there's something. I think that the phrase psychological literacy was interesting to me because that it kind of implies like in the field of psychology where there are studies and there are some studies that are really great and there are some studies that are really poorly done or just kind of misinterpreted because people want to get clicks on something. And I want to make clear, like, I'm a engineer and a lifelong kind of somewhat student, somewhat experimenter of human nature. Like neither of us are psychology PhDs or anything like that. Um, but I think that I also think that psychology and like approaching it academically is only one lens through which to approach human nature. It's a very valuable lens, but it's it's a relatively new field. We as a species have been trying to understand our nature and writing about it and kind of confronting different aspects of it for millennia. And so I could rephrase psychological literacy, which on one hand is knowing yourself, knowing your patterns, and knowing the patterns of our species well enough to know when you're kind of deceiving yourself or when you're just playing one of those patterns out. But I could contrast the phrase psychological literacy with something like understanding human nature. Psychological literacy has also a little bit of a gatekeeping aspect to it, whereas understanding human nature is like it's a lifelong pursuit, and it's something that I think kind of behooves everybody to do, because to the to the degree that you don't understand and you don't you're not curious about your own nature, you're really kind of blind to it and unable to steer it or work with it. And it's a really it's a beautiful, it's a profound topic.
Yeah, I really like that you said the word curious there. I think
Yeah.
I think I think there's so much to work with just in terms of what arises in any given person's life, that if you're not curious about it, I'm I wonder what you're curious about at all, or maybe you're just very externally focused. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. And a lot of people are, and that's
Yeah,
cool.
I guess,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's just it is such an endlessly rich topic of study, and I think that's
Yeah.
like you have people who, let's say, uh, join a contemplative tradition and go to like a monastery, and they sit there with their own minds for years on end, because even in the quiet of a monastery, it is still so rich an experience once you decide to pay attention to it.
Yeah. And I think that maybe we should clarify that this is a conversation between two people who are incredibly curious about human nature.
Hmm.
So if that's if you're listening and that sounds like a very boring thing for people to nerd out about, you might be listening to the wrong podcast.
I make no
Um,
apologies.
nor do I. Ah,
Well, so there's another question that was submitted, which was around. I wanted to hop to the most effective non-pharmaceutical treatments for ennui, which is a kind of a French term for like boredom and sluggishness.
that is the first time I've ever heard it pronounced like that. I've only read it.
Uh huh.
Cool. Okay, I learned something today. Anyways,
Uh huh. And yeah, so the person specified non-pharmacological. How do you get your kicks? Well, I mean, um, um, I think I tend to classify boredom as like an inability to be interested in what's already there. I mean, but again, I'm a very curious person, and I find a lot of my surroundings already interesting. But I guess, yeah, if you're bored somehow, some combination, not just the curiosity, but um, to seek a sense of agency. I think the
mhm.
sluggishness aspect of ennui can be connected with some forms of learned helplessness, um, and our we tend to have a built-in, not built-in, an internal and notably learned uh, meter of how much we think in a situation we have agency versus we're helpless.
Mhm.
And we're often watching and studying our own responses to the situations around us,
Yeah.
and deciding and believing whether we have the ability to do things or not. And I think a lot of times when people feel stuck, they don't realize that they feel helpless and that they can train themselves to believe otherwise. So
Yeah.
somehow, and when I'm in those situations, when I'm, say, bored, I look for something to do. I even sometimes look for something that, like, as part of the goal, feels like a hassle. I do something inconvenient or annoying just to prove to myself that I'm not a slave to my conditions. And I
Yeah.
find this remarkably effective. This is like one of the, like, mental health tips that I really, really wish someone had told me when I was younger.
Yeah. There's a really specific feeling that I get when like I do something that's totally out of my kind of just like the flow or the rhythm that kind of just like almost like hypnotized by. I remember this once I was just um this was a while ago, like years ago. I was in San Francisco and I was just like, I was looking at my workload for the day and I was like, I don't really have anything to do. And I don't remember exactly how I justified it to myself or whatever, but I just decided, like, you know what, the hell with it. Let's go drive and like walk up this really big hill that's going to take the entire afternoon. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
and um, and I just kind of just went and did it, and it was just very out of my flow at the time, but it was this kind of like like it's a little silly because it's a relatively minor thing, but it was just exhilarating, like, I'm alive, I'm out of whatever pattern I was just in. uh
I last summer I also had a hill that I would walk up in exactly these conditions. And I think exercise is such a great way to prove this point to yourself, because
mhm.
um on some, I mean, I'm not going to tell you you can't make meaning out of a can of soup if you don't want to. You can make meaning out of everything. But
Yeah.
there's something about lots of exercise that just in the moment is so viscerally pointless. And I think if you can if you can harness that pointlessness, that, like, even though it's pointless feeling exercise I can make myself do, then you you watch yourself achieve this tremendous level of self-control,
Yeah.
and an agency springs out of that. That's really, I mean, it's just kind of like a main line for it. So
Yeah. I'll also say, just for myself, like especially when I'm, if it's nighttime or if I'm just like not feeling running off into the hills, um I I'm trying to get out of the habit of basically forcing myself to do almost anything.
hmm,
In the sense that, like, if I feel bored or stuck or something, like, especially if it's for something work related, but not always. What I will basically, the like the meta condition that I am in is I have this set of things that I feel I need to achieve, and yet that is not like and like that's kind of this thing that I have in my mind. And like if there's like A, B, C, and D on there, none of those are like what like I viscerally want to do. And maybe there's thing E on that list, which is like clean my kitchen or just like tidy my space or something like that. And people tend to view that as like, oh, I'm procrastinating. But to me, it's like this is actually just what my system wants to do next. And if I just get that out of my system and get things moving again, usually afterwards I have a little bit of momentum. And then it's kind of like whatever tasks A, B, C, D were there actually just kind of fall out of me. Um,
uh-huh.
and it's like if you find yourself in this state of like stuckness, boredom, ennui, whatever, I think a question to ask is like, if I didn't have these things to do, what would I just naturally want to do? Like, how do I want to care for myself, for my space, for my just sense of fun and well being, and do that instead. Like, just like fuck your work. Um,
I think that touches on, if I can queue up two like really points that I really adore, is like one that is that, like, the I was offering something along the lines of like push yourself in some way, and your response was kind of a both push yourself and don't. You're kind of, well, maybe push myself in a different way and see if I get momentum, but also don't push on something that's resisting.
yeah,
And
for me,
I
I
think
look
the
for hope.
sorry.
I look for a pull, like, and even if it's a little pull, if the pull feels exciting, I find that if I give myself a little bit of momentum in that direction, like the ball kind of starts rolling on its own. Like doing things, it should feel like the phrase that I really like using is like ripe fruit falling out of a tree. And if it doesn't feel like that, then it's not ready, and or there's something else that there's some stage that I have to set for it first, or kind of like but I don't try to just force myself, especially when it's at the expense of my own sense of well-being or peace or flow or whatever. But
Right.
I kind of interrupted. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So the I guess you're saying really like reverses the order of the points I was going to kind of tack on to what you said. Which is the second one is you know, if one is feeling stuck like in ennui, um maybe that's something itself to get curious about. What's this stuckness? What's that from? Maybe I don't actually want to be doing the things. Maybe there's some reason or something there to be uncovered. And you know, it's like um you know, maybe there's a voice in one's head saying I should be doing X, Y, and Z in the moment or with my life. And the reason why I feel call it bored or whatnot is because there's actually part of me that has its real best interests in mind and is refusing to do what it doesn't think it should be doing.
That's generally I found that's generally the case. And it's like one thing that's also really fun is like lean into it. Like was like, okay, what if I were to just make this just the most delicious, like shitty boredom, stuckness, ennui, ennui that I can. Like, what if I were to just be gratuitous with it? I'm going to like just like leave my laptop like askew and half open on my desk, and just like leave a half open can of sparkling water somewhere, and I'm going to take a nap and just be like, "Le fuck this."
I mean,
Um,
you're basically like running acting school on yourself. Let's just get it. Let's just own it.
yeah.
Let's just get in the character.
Right, like, but just like instead of making it this thing that you're like judging yourself for, just like
Yeah.
have fun with it. And I find that tends to break the cycle, but the paradox of it is that if you do that purely to break the cycle, it doesn't work. Like you have to actually just like lean into it and have fun with it. And if that doesn't want to happen, but something else will be fun to like lean into and like have fun with, and like do that. The point is to go, like it is to point yourself towards where there is sensation and where there is like this something that feels like fun, um rather than figuring out like yet another trick to force yourself to do things that like every cell in your body is trying to resist.
This is to summarize for not everything, but just what I was kind of getting around in is this is an example of, you know, you're using your experience again as a laboratory, like as you're leaning into what is really going on here. What more can I know about myself?
Yeah,
And you're making it a safe space in which to have that experience.
yeah. And I can actually I feel like this would actually be a really interesting segue to the adjacent topic to that, which would non-entheogenic mind altering experiences.
Great.
How do you feel about that?
If Sure. I was just going to say that one other thing
Yeah.
about your response being different from mine is that it underscores our learning, our warning about psychological intimacy,
Mhm.
psychological literacy. Sorry, that that there is no right answer. That no one really knows these things. That in fact, these things are so random and all over the place, and one needs five different answers on hand that might match what's actually going on with you.
Yeah.
When the moment you feel like you have something prescriptive, you should really be doubting yourself.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think that's kind of the nature of it. Like you're dealing
Mhm.
with living systems that tend to resist being placed into like firm, rigid categories and patterns of like A, then B, then C. Like I find that it's kind of a part of my nature, and I think a lot of people's nature.
I think it is the essence of the human experience, of the human, of the human spirit. It is the essence of it to resist being treated as an automaton, to
Yeah.
resist being reduced to an algorithm, to resist being controlled. And every facet of society that ever tries to do that to us will come across as dehumanizing. Period.
Yeah. And it's like it's our nature to, when we see patterns, to become the exception to the pattern and to find ways to break those patterns. I love breaking patterns, just like one of my favorite things in existence. Um, non-entheogenic mind
Yeah.
altering. Yeah, so this is a fun one. So I could get into like, I think there's a sort of a stock answer, which is various forms of meditation, and so on. And that's an interesting avenue to explore. For myself, I actually think that a little bit what I was talking about with that, like when I was talking about like leaning into laziness, find pockets of reality, of existence that you consider wrong or bad or like shameful or like you shouldn't do, like laziness being one, and lean into it. Like I remember those, one of just this, I had a really trippy experience last year. I was I had a few projects, and I was kind of just trying to push myself a little harder than I really uh, really was getting much out of. And I was just like, okay, I'm being lazy right now. What if I just experience, just like try to just like have experience like divine laziness? Like if you look at, if you look at, and this is getting a little bit into the spiritual aspect of things, like look at everything as God, everything is a face of God, everything is a cell in the body of God, or whatever you want to put it, the universe. I'm very non-prescriptivist about language, whatever is resonant for people. But that means that pretty much everything, there is some form or some way of experiencing of it. That's, like, try and experience it without judgment, or try and experience it like in the most delicious, awesome way possible. Like if you're somebody who's a workaholic, like just force yourself to be lazy for a day and just be the exact opposite of what you usually are, and do everything in your power to make it a really juicy, fun experience. Like just figure out where you have some identity about being something, and then just like push yourself into being just a total fucking opposite. Like for me, that was also like being this very like dyed in the wool rationalist, secular scientist engineer, leaning all the way into spirituality and seeing what came out of that. I find that when I do that, like it's regularly a total mind fuck. Just the world shifts around me, and then I find myself in this kind of superposition of identities at the end of it, where uh, I am this thing, I am also this contrasting thing. That was a really interesting, weird bit of psychological territory that I didn't know existed half an hour ago. And I now I'm kind of like, I can see reality from two different perspectives. And it's just like I find that just putting yourself into territories that you tend to judge or find wrong, or have have an identity of not blank, so lean all the way into blank and try to experience it on its own terms. That is very much a mind altering experience. Are you still there? Do we still have the audio?
Hello. Okay. You cut out for a while. I don't
Okay.
know what I missed.
Where did I was silent for a bit? Was did the signal cut off at some point?
I don't know. It doesn't report. We'll just see where it went.
Okay, cool.
I have a reply to like some of what you said.
Yeah.
So one little story that isn't exactly an answer to the question, but um, that your answer reminded me of in terms of the power of a mindset. Is I once met someone who I think I just had a poor night of sleep, and I was talking about how insomnia is really frustrating, and I'm
Hmm.
sitting up all night and just getting more, I don't know, well, maybe not getting more frustrated, but just kind of stuck with nothing to do. And they were like, "Oh, I kind of love it when I don't sleep." I'm like, well, I finally have this really quiet time where nothing else is going on, when I can just be with myself and enjoy it. And being like, "Hey, how are you doing?" Quality time together. Um, and that that change of attitude um, opened themselves up to a kind of experience that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
That they made it juicy in their own way.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but I like I tend not to. This is maybe my semantic issue here. I tend
Yeah.
not to think of any kind of mind altering experience as not meeting my definition of spirituality and on some level or another. um I tend to lump a lot of things under that word.
Hmm.
um and I think in general choosing to experience things, for instance, as sacred, but there are other uh ways you can prime your mind to experience
Yeah.
them. um certainly does change things. It certainly does change how you experience, like how and what comes in, what goes out, what person you are. I sometimes will set aside, every small number of weeks I'll set aside like half a day and have what I call a ceremony with myself. And
Hmm.
the key aspects of it is that I'm putting away interruptions, and I'm going to be alone in a place. And my point is to just sit and be with myself. And that is time that is turned inwards.
Yeah.
And I call it a ceremony, and I treat it reverently. And having that framing on it m- kind of makes it important to me, even though it's totally made up, and it's part of what keeps me healthy.
Yeah.
um,
Definitely.
another bit of answer to the original question I have is I know you wanted to sidestep meditation, and this is something that I don't necessarily mean has to be a meditation thing.
Yeah.
um,
I didn't want to like sidestep it. It was mostly that's the answer that I usually hear. And I
yeah,
just kind of
yeah,
wanted to get something different. Like meditation is awesome.
right. um, And one of the things that meditation aims to bring to people are certain insights. And what I would say is having any kind of an insight um, is a mind altering experience.
Hmm.
And my uncommon experience of doing this is, my background, for people who don't know, is I used to be a mathematician, a theoretical mathematician. And there's a point when a concept, when the mathematical concept clicks in your brain, and suddenly you have experienced it. It's like you're trying to learn math. You're beating your head against an idea. You're trying to learn what it means. You're like doing the computation over and over again, or you're staring at it. You're staring at it. You're rereading the book. You're re-listening to the lecture, whatever, over and over again. And before a certain point, at all points in time before, you don't get it. And then in a flash, it hits you.
Hmm.
And after that point, your brain is different, and you see a thing, and you're able to hold a thing that you weren't able to hold in your head.
Yeah.
um, and I think one of the things that people who really enjoy learning math on its own terms really enjoy is the experience of the insight when you're learning math.
Yeah. What?
And then and just similarly, I've found this is something I'm not prepared to say any conclusions on, but I've been thinking more and more as I've gotten deeper into meditation about how the process of trying to convey deep mindfulness and the insights of deep mindfulness to people is analogous to trying to teach mathematics to people. It has like a lot of the same fraught things where you're trying to explain to someone how to squeeze their brain into a certain wrinkled shape.
Mhm.
And some people, some instructors are more and less direct about this. So they'll in general be better and worse at teaching it. And some forms of meditation or some forms of teaching math will get the ideas and the mental gymnastics across better or worse. Um, but it's still the case that every person is coming at it with their own extremely unique brain shape. And people
Mhm.
tend to ascribe it to whether or not they had the good or bad math teacher or maybe the good or bad meditation teacher. But it turns out that a lot of it is just freaking personal.
Mhm.
And so there's really I don't like the word. I don't think the best word I have is alchemy right now, but there's just something like there's just something that it's just hard to point to and make sense of in either case. Insight is a personal experience.
Yeah. And I found a lot of the times, insight, a lot of the times, if insight on something is really elusive for me, and this is like when I'm doing even like engineering problems, if insight is elusive to me, a lot of the times the insight that I actually end up getting, that actually ends up changing things, is further upstream than like what's the answer to this problem, but it's like
Yeah.
it's like, why do I actually care about this? Or like, what in this situation do I actually care about? Like, is it is this insight, like this kind of goes back to the like, is every cell in my body resisting this for a reason? Is like, is this insight something that I have to learn and is taking me further on a path that I want to go down? Or is this insight me trying to force myself to do something that I don't want to do in the first place?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and sometimes the insight is like, this, like maybe I have hit the limits of my interest with this. Um, or there's something adjacent to this that I'm interested in. Or sometimes like it's like I just I there's I like asking myself like, are there all these little parts of me that feel safe? Like, do I feel like I have a plan for where I'm going with this project, in which I'm kind of getting my needs met and getting what I want out of it? Or am I just kind of going off this sort of mantra of like, work hard and you'll get where you want, and my system knows there's like
Yeah.
no, like, you need to actually steer a little bit. And I
Sometimes
find
your
that,
belief in what's right for you is a limiting belief.
yeah, but and it's like, but then like when I get to the point where it's like, oh, okay, so this is what I actually want out of this project. This is kind of ways that I'm overextending myself right now to try to make this thing work. And then I'll say, okay, I actually want to like offboard this thing in like 3 months, and I want to be steering in that direction. And like once I have that kind of like, once I've gotten that insight, which has nothing to do with the engineering problem that I'm trying to solve, a lot of the times, and the answer to the engineering thing just like falls out of me.
Hmm.
Like, it's just like the kind of the like the ripe fruit out of a tree thing.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like I have to address all of the like the personal stuff, really before, um before like my brain is willing to, my mind is willing
Hmm.
to surrender the answer to the technical stuff.
I mean, this is getting veering a bit more woo than I was maybe expecting to get in this conversation for me, but I'll just do it anyway.
Mhm.
This a story that I tell myself about such situations, whether or not it even makes sense for such a story to be true or false at all,
Mhm.
is that um, you know, I I often envision that my system is sensitive to my trying to coerce it into doing something. Like, that thing about the
Yeah.
human
Oh yeah.
spirit that I was mentioning, that my system is like, no, don't treat me like a machine.
Hmm.
And uh sometimes I have to back up and be like, okay, well, fine, we'll do this whatever it is your way, and then my system will do beautiful things.
Yeah, I to me that's not woo at all. Like that's like that. I've had just enough experiences of that and along those lines that's like one of my core tenets of operating now. Like I don't force myself to do things that I don't want to do unless they're like absolutely critically necessary. Like
Mhm.
I figure out like, okay, what part of me doesn't want to do this and what's the version of this that I am actually interested in and what's the
Mhm.
part of this that's actually valuable to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Do we this feels adjacent to the there was a question, the value of giving fucks and best practices for not giving fucks. I
You
I,
know,
I love this question.
I was putting my finger on that question around earlier when you were talking about leaning into things, experiences, or activities that you might carry into it a negative feeling about,
Mhm.
where you kind of have to release your fucks and then just do a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but please jump in and
Okay. Let's see. The value of giving fucks and best practices for not giving fucks. I'm gonna just preface this by saying that there is a really good book on this that I think is probably already like adjacent in mind for anybody who's heard of it, which is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, by I think Mark Manson is the guy who
correct.
wrote it. Yeah, that book is fantastic.
I learned this book from Maki, and it was exactly the things that I needed to hear given the state of my insanity at that time.
Yeah, but to summarize, and I'm not. I'm summarizing what I remember of the book. The book itself is I recommend reading it or the audiobook, but it's basically like they're not giving a fuck at all is not really a coherent way to go through life. And giving a fuck about everything will drive you absolutely insane. And the kind of the magic of it is like you decide what is really actually important to you, and you give as many fucks as makes sense to give about that. And by that I mean like you don't say I will do this at whatever cost. You say I will do this, and this is how much I'm willing to potentially like sacrifice, or this is what I'm willing to go through to do this. This is kind of my limit where I say, nope, not worth it anymore. But like, you don't give, and if things are not in your, like, I innately give a fuck about this category, you just don't extend extra fucks towards it. You just say like like somebody else cares about this a lot, and like it might even be that somebody else is angry at you
Mhm.
or hates you for not giving a fuck about it or judges you, or there's a lot of like political stuff around this that I'm not even gonna I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but uh but where like there's a lot of pressure to like give all the fucks about all the things, and I'm like, I don't have that many fucks available, I'm sorry. Slash I'm not actually sorry. But it's like I have I have a finite amount of bucks that I give in a day, and those go towards things that I innately give a fuck about, that are adjacent to me and that I actually have some degree of power to influence. And if somebody wants me to give a fuck about something that they give a really strong fuck about, and they have a problem with the fact that it to me it's not something that's like core to me, then like that's they need to find somebody else who they need to find the people for whom that is like a core fuck and get them involved, and not fight me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of
Um,
my intro volley to that question.
yeah. I think I think this question has both like personal and political dimensions as well.
Yeah.
Um, I, you know, uh, I do agree with you and with that book that um, it is insanity when you are not exercising ultimate discretion over your doling out of your fucks.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I think on any level when we don't treat one another as um, as having the right to decide what's right for ourselves,
And which fucks we give.
and thereby, um, I think of that as some kind of an act of violence personally.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one can take that as an extreme, and maybe one can ask whether violences are justified or yeah, fine. They're like tack on questions. Fuck them.
Yeah.
Um, but I you know I don't I don't I think that coercion is really something that we're doing on socially much more than we think we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you cultivate an awareness uh, for how we're doing that, you really start seeing it everywhere. And if you don't, you're kind of like pointing around a weapon of shame in each direction you're pointing at each person you're interacting with, and not realizing you're pointing a weapon at them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think a lot of people like experience a tyranny under this, of everyone else's opinions of what they should and shouldn't care about, and you see people rebelling, and they end up rebelling in like kind of screwed up ways of saying, well, I'm not going to give a fuck about X, Y, and Z, and they end up saying very insensitive things, or rebelling in very nonsense ways. And
Yeah.
um, I mean, I think the way you rebel can be shitty too. um, so I'm not like saying that any such behavior is fine, but I also think that that behavior can't be seen in isolation of the fact that they're pushing against people who've been morally bullying them all their lives.
Yeah. And I want to kind of present what I consider to be a very effective counter tactic against this. And it's an effective counter tactic because it's not actually a counter tactic. But it's to not engage in fighting about this on the other person's terms.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm. No, you're giving them power when you do.
right, exactly. And it's like when somebody expects you to give a certain fuck, and it's not a fuck that you want to expend, don't put that fuck into fighting them about it.
Right.
Like that. The thing, what I find is that when I kind of recenter myself and I am like, this is not something that makes sense for me to give a fuck about, or this is not something where my like time, energy, money, resources, whatever, are going to have any outsized value, or that's just not personally like this isn't where I personally feel called to point myself now, like, and I feel called to point myself here or there or whatever. I'm doing this, and now I'm not in their frame of reference anymore of trying to justify why I don't give a fuck about this thing. I'm in my own frame of reference of this is what I give a fuck about, and this thing that you're trying to like hammer me about is, it's important to you, and I accept that, but like I'm kind of following my own road here.
No,
Um,
it's kind of like a bad faith trap to argue with it.
yeah, exactly.
It's like the old political adage of a reporter asking the politician publicly, when did you stop beating your spouse? And
Well,
and if they say, well, not like a when or no, I didn't, it's like you kind of have to ignore the question if it's something that you actually weren't doing or
yeah,
something.
yeah. And then if somebody insists on, continuing to get on my space about that, that happens very, very seldom to me. But then that's kind of the point where like I draw boundaries, and I'm just like, if you're going to make this a problem for me, I'm going to make it a problem for you. And I'm just going to do that in like as fast, effective, and like brutal a way as possible that makes it clear that like when I set boundaries, like don't step over them.
Yeah.
And then
So
it's very, very rare that I have to do that.
so measuring, allocating out your fucks consciously is a boundaries game.
Yeah,
And there are plenty of people in the world who do not wish for you to have your own boundaries because it does not serve their perceived interests.
yeah, and I
And
think
that's it's a hard and sad fact about the world.
and I think that for a lot of these folks, like they're not even doing it consciously. Like they're kind of like, oh, if I do this thing, then, or if I talk this way to these people, then they tend to do what I want. And like you just being like, oh no, I recognize that pattern, I'm not interested in engaging with it, usually just means that you just don't pattern match what they're looking for, and they move on. Like it usually, like if it becomes a fight, it's just kind of, it's just, it's a waste of energy for you, and it's not even something that they want. They're just kind of unconsciously playing out their own shit.
I go back and forth on this one personally.
Mhm.
The of how constructive it is to name your boundaries to people.
Mhm.
Sometimes it makes people flip out, and sometimes it makes people stop and be like, oh shoot, I'm sorry, yeah, thanks for pointing that out, and they're really great about it.
Yeah, I find that
I think your one's ability to select one's company is a big factor in this.
yeah. And I find that the more, like, sometimes I explicitly, like, in word name my boundaries, especially if it's something that's like uncommon, or maybe not, not something that somebody would expect.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time it's like, I find that the more that I just internalize, like, this is how I do things, this is kind of what I'm willing to do and not do, like, a lot of it just in the way that I steer, in the way that I, and like, show up in a specific space, like a lot of it just kind of tends to evolve naturally in the direction that I'm already embodying. And it also makes it really clear, like, if something is like not pattern matching where I am at with my yeses and nos and boundaries, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm out immediately. I'm not like waiting around to see if it pattern matches. I'm just like, oh no, fuck this, this is not my thing.
I think that's a department in which I could use some more work. I think I give so much benefit of the doubt to things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. um
Also, I do want to like flag um, that some of these responses we have are very solidly in the category of advices that are simple but not easy for people. That I think we make it sound simple, and everyone will be like, it's not that simple. And my response is, no, it is this simple. But I'm not claiming that makes it easy at all.
yeah. Oh,
That
it's super, yeah.
and that claiming my ability to make my own moral judgments versus those of the crowd has required for me to actually distance myself quite a lot from the crowd. My social life is really different than it's been, partly because I recognize, I don't feel safe around the moral bullies that I know, and I don't want to have to be running this game all of the time of what battles I want to expose myself to them, or what situations that I need to so artfully avoid.
Yeah, if I have to, like,
It
constantly
comes at a
be,
cost that not everyone is always in a point to pay or something.
yeah, if I have to, like, constantly be like, have my guard up or be defending myself, or like just kind of be playing defense against getting pulled into like discussions or moral traps or shit that I'm not like personally interested in, I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna avoid this like person, situation, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Just I'm going to renegotiate like how and where and when I show up.
Yeah.
And it,
Um. Yeah. Let's uh. Let's
do we
move
want
on to
to?
something light to maybe finish up with.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Great. Um. Oh, how about this one? It's way off topic. Maybe that's too far
Oh,
into it.
I quite like that one. Okay, I want to answer just one of the stupidest questions first.
Sure.
So I'm gonna do a, let's see. There's two, there were two that there's, can white men actually jump though? Um, I'm I don't know. I'm really conflicted about that.
I just don't have anything to add to it.
I mean, like I'm gonna just run an experiment and just like I'm not gonna force myself to jump. I'm just going to see if I naturally want to jump.
Are you
Um,
white and are you a man?
I think so. I'm Finnish.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I think that counts. But I'm not like forcing myself to jump, and I'm not. My body is not just like jumping of its own volition. So I'm just gonna answer the question like probably not. Like we're just, it's just kind of it's science.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
one of our other lighter questions we got was skunks, yes or no?
yeah. What are your feelings on that?
Um, I have never been sprayed by a skunk. I've never had the real up close personal treatment, but I've been near them and not had issues. And of course, I've like smelled them in the neighborhood numerous times. And my confession is that I kind of like the smell of a skunk in the area. I'm kind of for it.
Hmm. Yeah. My attitude is kind of like I don't want to be speciesist.
Mm.
Um, and I kind of, just let people do their thing, let animals do their thing.
Hey, how do you
Um,
feel about ticks and mosquitoes then?
ooh, that's a thorny one. I mean, that's a kind of a like, okay, I still believe in letting them do their thing, but we're also sworn enemies. Um, Skunks, I've yet to, and like they're them doing their thing is a directly harms me, uh,
Mhm.
and thus me doing my thing with them directly harms them back. And it's just kind of a very stupid cycle. With skunks, it's more like, okay, I don't want to like wander into his turf and they're just trying to do their thing. And like usually, if it gets to the point where somebody has a bad relationship or a bad interaction with a skunk, like there was probably a misunderstanding or just like sheer outright human stupidity involved.
Mm. Mm.
Misunderstanding about territory, things like that.
Fair.
Um, yeah. And I think maybe let's close with but I think those are the answers to those two questions. We'll
Mhm.
save the rest of the sillier ones for later. Um, there was one question: what's the biggest sky you've ever seen?
I have a few candidates. Um, I remember the first time I experienced the big sky. Um, the end of my first year of college, um, in an existentialist fit, I bought a Greyhound bus pass, which they don't sell bus passes anymore, and kind of
Mhm.
sad. Um, and took it at least halfway across the country, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and we were somewhere crossing Iowa, and I looked out of the window, and I still remember the sight of this big swoosh of a cloud that was being illuminated by the moon, and it took up just, I was only looking out the window, and it was this big sky,
Mhm.
and it just it just just really like carved a mark in my heart, and I always remember that moment.
Mhm.
That was the first big sky. Other big sky moments on top of a mountain in the Sierras, like at the top of the Sierra Ridge. Um, you're not only like you not only have a clear horizon, but you're kind of above everything. Like the horizon even goes like below past a bit,
Mhm.
and and also driving across the loneliest highway, US 50 across Nevada.
Mhm.
Just plenty of spaces out there on these long straight roads between the ridges.
Yeah.
You?
Um, so for myself, I have one specific answer to it, and that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Me and some mutual friends of ours went out to Eureka Dune in Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a dark sky preserve.
Mm-hmm.
Which means
Mm-hmm.
there's like very little air pollution, very little light pollution. And I remember having this experience. We just slept out under the stars on this dune, But I remember having this experience of being on this kind of just sand dune, which is just an interesting uh, place of itself, and looking around and seeing these like canyons of just like layers of rock that are, hundreds of millions of years old. And then looking up, and if you've never seen the Milky Way in a dark sky preserve, it is a life-changing experience. It is the
It's
most,
totally different.
yeah, like it's it's not like I see a few stars. Like it is if it's not on your bucket list, like put it at the top of your bucket list. Um, like it is the most just pure awe that I have experienced in my life. And just looking up is just like you don't see, like this darkness and a bunch of little pinpricks of light, and you're trying to find constellation. It's just this river of color and light. Like you're just staring up into this like living ancient eternity. um and I'm actually trying to get into a habit of, whenever there's a new moon out here, there's dark sky zones within like an hour or so of Denver, and trying to make it like a monthly thing if the weather's good, to go out there and just kind of like bathe in that awe.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Death Valley was my runner-up. I think if I had to list
Mm-hmm.
another, that's the stars there are really, really fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we say some things in closing?
Yeah, let's do so. I have no idea what I actually want to say in closing.
Well, I guess we get to kind of pause and then say something from scratch. Maybe I'll go.
All right.
Okay, well, you opened, so I guess I'll close. This is the first of who knows how many installments of Maki and Jay chatting about whatever we feel like, possibly influenced by your suggestions. We hope you enjoyed it and look forward to your feedback of any variety. And I'm wishing everyone out there the best in their journeys.
Yeah. I'll echo that. If you listen to it and enjoyed it, like absolutely let us know. If there's something that you want to talk about, absolutely, that you want to hear us kind of riff on, absolutely let us know. This is very much an experiment for both of us, but I've enjoyed this, and I'm kind of just curious to see where this goes.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
Okay, bye everyone.
All right, bye.